One of the issues that companies worry about is the regulation, the regulatory framework that we operate in. And my key message here is don't be afraid, because actually it's the same for everybody else. You do need to take advice, but everybody who's operating in the export environment has to do exactly what you're doing. And if they're doing it successfully, so can you. But what are the areas you need to think about? Well, first of all, I would get advice from organisations, particularly like the Chamber of Commerce. They're very, very good in terms of offering advice on documentation, customs, duties, practices, particularly around export documentation though. And what do we need to think about there? Well, we need to think about the certificates of origin that you may require. We need to think about movement certificates, and we may need to think about carnets. These are probably these are phrases that you may not understand, and often when you're dealing with the European Union, you may not need these documentations anyway. But if you do need them once you're exporting beyond there, the people at the Chamber of Commerce are really, really good to help you. Certificates of origin can be EU certificates of origin. They can be British Arab Chamber of Commerce certificates. But whatever you require, people in the Chamber can help you. Also, your freight forwarder will help. Your freight forwarder will know what's required in different markets. Customs and duties. Now, these are again are things that you don't typically deal with in the UK. An import tariff, when you sell to certain markets, is a charge that's levied by the local customs officials on your products when they arrive into market. They could typically be based on weight, or what we call ad valorem. It's a Latin phrase for meaning based on the value. And to do that, you need to identify what is called your HS code. That's the harmonized system of tariffs. It used to be called, when I started exporting, Brussels nomenclature, but thankfully you don't have to worry about that today. So you get an HS code, and that typifies what product or service you have and gives a long series of numbers that you can then go on to a website, which I'll tell you about. It's the European Union website called the Market Access Database. It allows you to enter the HS code. You can then look at every country in the world, and you can actually identify what the amount of tariff you're likely to face in market when you get there. With the World Trade Organization and the drive to lower import tariffs around the world, a lot of this is actually reduced, but there are still countries where import tariffs are very high, and for example in some countries where luxury taxes may occur. It's clearly important that you think about that and you know what's going to be applicable to your products. Don't forget that in the EU we're talking about tariff and quota free, so if you're starting off exporting, I would certainly think about starting off in the European Union. And you've probably heard about something called free trade agreements. Recently, the European Union signed a series of free trade agreements with Central American countries, Honduras and Colombia and Peru. In the last couple of years, we've signed a free trade agreement with South Korea. And what that does is it gives free import tariff-free access on many goods, not all goods and services. You'd need to look at that. But there are opportunities to take advantage of where sometimes your products may have been applicable for import tariffs, but in the future they may not. So I'd certainly think about starting off in the EU. You avoid the import tariffs altogether. And then when you go outside of the EU, think about areas where we have FTAs or free trade agreements. You need to think about INCOTERMS in terms of regulatory. Now, INCOTERMS, the International Chamber of Commerce in London, provides a list of different terms. And typically they're about payment, but it's very important that you understand what they are. For example, if you're selling a product for $10 to the USA, the person wants to know whether that is, for example, DDU or DDP. Well, what's the difference? The difference in those terms is that it's delivered, duty unpaid, or delivered, duty paid. Well, that's very important if you've got an import tariff that's quite high. And if you quote on DDP, that means that the responsibility in the process is for you as the seller to be paying the import duty. If you think you're delivering DDU, but your customer thinks you're delivering DDP, you're in trouble. So make sure you get that one right. Think about the regulatory environment you're operating in. Export controls are an important matter as well. There are some countries around the world that we're not allowed to trade with. You can get that list through BIS. There's an export controls organisation website that you can see where you're not allowed to deal with. But there are also products that might be dual use, or certain products that we ban in certain countries. The export controls people will help you, guide you through that process, and will help you to get what are called OGLs, open general licenses, to operate in certain markets. The most important thing about the regulatory framework, is not to be frightened about it, to take advice, to think about it, but to do it properly and to be open about things. Because if you try to cheat the system, you'll get into real trouble. If you do things properly, if you take advice and you conform to the regulatory requirements, then you should have no problem. It is the same for everybody. It's the same for you. It's the same for everybody else. And you may want to talk about packaging and labelling as a final thing on regulatory environment. You need to know whether there are data sheets that are required for your products in market, and do they have to be translated into the local language. You might think about the actual packaging. In Germany and certain European countries, there's a regulation called Grüne Punkt, or Green Point, and it's about the ability to recycle the packaging material that you use. Whatever it is, you need to conform, and you cannot rely purely on the products and services and packaging that you use in the UK being applicable in the marketplace. So think about your packaging and labelling. Think about customs duties and import tariffs. Think about your INCOTERMS and making sure that you've got that sorted out. Think about your documentation, and think about what declarations you need to make to HMRC and others. But overall, simple message: get advice, do it properly, conform, and you'll be fine.